I will try to be short. So, the first point that I would like to put forward today is the role of Belgium as initiator and vector country of the international cooperation and in the promotion of international law. Belgium, as you know, has always been at the forefront of international collaboration and plays on the international scene a pioneering role in the field of human rights. Belgium, the Netherlands, and Luxembourg signed the first international collaboration in 1943. It was the creation of the so-called Benelux. Belgium is also a founding member of the European Community, the forerunner of the current European Union. My country was among the first four non-member states of the Council of the League of Nations and also participated to the creation of the United Nations. If Belgium is not blameless and suffered some convictions by the European Court of Human Rights, particularly in terms of overcrowding and confinement in our prisons. We just have a report yesterday, I think, about this problem. And anyway, it was the first Western European countries to remove death penalty from its penal code, for example. Belgium is also a founding member of the Council of Europe and currently chairs it. Respect of social and environmental standards or respect of human rights are almost always the filter through which my party analyzes draft laws, bills, and international negotiations. However, the application of these standards often experiencing a lack of effectiveness, but anyway, my group is actively advocating to end this situation in the current as well as under negotiation and future treaties. The second point that I would like to speak about today is the proportional and institutional Belgian system, which promotes collaboration between governments and is a good experience for international collaborations. Despite its weaknesses and difficulties that Belgium sometimes faces, for example, to form a federal government, the country knows a great culture of dialogue. On the one hand, because of the proportional representation system that requires political parties, sometimes with very different ideologies, to discuss and agree on fundamental reforms for our country, as well as on our positions to be adopted on the European stages and on the international ground. On the other hand, our institutional system, with one federal parliament and its two houses, even if the powers of the Senate were diminished during the last reform of the state, 6 governments and parliaments oblige negotiations and collaborations, since each power is entirely autonomous and its competencies and have its own competencies, and there is no hierarchy of norms. Cooperation mechanism and mechanism to solve potential conflicts, such as cooperation agreements, consultation committees, interministerial conferences, etc., have been put in place to force the dialogue when necessary. This feeds the internal ideas debates and allows to be ready to negotiate at the international level and to be able to be creative and open-minded in those negotiations. Even if the arguments seem sometimes conflicting, this does not prevent us from reaching agreement anyway. And I'm already coming for the third and last point that I would like to share with you today, and it's about some examples of specific international issues handled in the Foreign Relations Committee of the Belgian Parliament in favor of human rights, the committee where I am. As a Belgian MP, nearly elected, I'm particularly focused on the respect of the so-called European values in the sense of the European Convention on Human Rights, a convention to which Belgium has always adhered, and she was also one of the initiators' countries. The importance of values is not to be overlooked or confused with a form of conservatism. No. Indeed, the idea is just to recognize that a common set of fundamental rights and freedoms united peoples and states all together, both at the UN level and its charter, and at the European level with the European Court for Human Rights, which is fully integrated in EU treaties. I'm convinced that at the European level, these rights are cumulative, and the European Court for Human Rights going even further than the Charter for Human Rights. So lately, European values were violated by several member states through the adoption of national legislation in flagrant contradiction with them. I think, for example, of Hungary. For me, these abuses call for a strong and adequate response of the European institutions, guardians of the treaties. Unfortunately, no appropriate answer has been given so far, although legal instruments exist and give Europeans the means to ensure compliance with those values by all member states. It's not about undermining the sovereignty of a member state, its history, its language, or its own culture, but you cannot join the European project without respecting its values, its rights, and its fundamentals. These are the guarantees that the EU is indeed a common project for all citizens being part of it. The European institutions cannot just observe without acting on the matter. The Union can not only be attentive to budgetary procedures and ignore attacks on its values and rights, freedoms of Europeans, whatever their origin, opinion, or sexual orientation are. The economic crisis should not become a breeding ground for conservative speeches and legislations questioning our social, egalitarian, and progressive model, and de facto affecting the weakest. It's only through the rights and duties listed by the European treaties and conventions and the political will that the European Union could become a Nobel Prize-winning example of peace. European history should remind us that inward-looking attitude, all kinds of selfishness and nationalism represent a threat to the European project of unity among our peoples. This European approach I've just described obviously applies also to the international community. Indeed, these values also implies consistency in the international actions of Belgium. It's not enough to give lessons. We have to be consistent when our country is acting on the international field. Under the guise of international solidarity, peace, or of preventing a massacre, our country cannot ignore the context nor international law and international humanitarian law, which apply fully and in all situations. Being a vector of peace cannot be unilaterally declared. It is something to build and that has to be verified in actions. In that sense, I would like to put forward two files on which I've been working in the Foreign Affairs Committee. First, the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. In this case, our country must require that all parties respect international law. And through international law, it's surely the only way to avoid debates leading by passion instead of rights. When I strongly criticize some Israeli policies as the colonization, it's important to put forward the international laws that Israel is breaking and to bring back the discussion to the respect of UN resolution, for example. Otherwise, it's always leading to some misleading interpretation of the opposition to the state of Israel, the hate of Jewish people, the attack against the security of the state of Israel and its civilians. While the question is simply about requiring from the state, member of the United Nations, to respect international law and ceasing to commit atrocities in total impunity. In that way, ratification by Palestine of a series of agreements, including the Rome Statute of the International Criminal Court, goes in the good direction, because it demonstrates the will of Palestinian Authority to end the culture of impunity that prevailed until today regarding to crimes committed on its territory. But just as the rights and duties related to a state status, this ratification will introduce duties for Palestine and to prosecute before an international court those who have committed genocide, war, and aggression crimes and crimes against humanity. I would also like to talk about the international coalition against Daesh or ISIL. My political group, the socialist one, has always adopted a common approach in all international conflicts. Far from double standards, each time we have called for diplomacy, respect of the principle and proportionality, and application of international law without exception. And even when Belgium participates in international military operations, first and foremost, we require UN framework to give our green light. Our country must indeed show that it's simultaneously a partner concerned about sustainable peace and international and humanitarian law. Thus, in the resolution adopted by the House of Belgium authorizing the Belgian participation in the international coalition against ISIL, my group, which is actually in the opposition, demanded and received the introduction of particular reference to Article 51 of the UN Charter, as well as we have obtained the concerns about humanitarian aspects of such an intervention will also be guaranteed, especially concerning the post-conflict reconstruction. Through those two examples, and I will finish here because I think you are all hungry. But through those two examples, you can see and imagine how tricky it is to work on human rights in our global context, and especially for a young member of parliament as me. Tricky first because human rights are not necessarily something obvious. They are too often opposed against states' autonomy, states' right to develop, and economic interests. Instead of considering that they can indeed be important factors playing a role in favor of these aims. Tricky also because I have sometimes the feeling, and I'm surely not the only one, that it's so difficult to ensure the respect of those human rights, that it's useless to continue the fight. It's maybe something I've got to get used with, being in the opposition, I don't know, I will see. But hopefully, difficulties reinforce, indeed, my will to work and keep going on to try to remind all politicians in Belgium, but also the civil society, about human rights and the importance to implement and protect them worldwide. Should it be through continuous questions addressed to my government, or through the introduction of resolutions aiming at guaranteeing, for example, education rights for children in Cambodia, or the right to food in Burundi? Should it be through organizing information campaigns for the citizens, or through participating to abroad missions with various NGOs in order to put lights on their work and problems they are facing on the ground? Or should it be through parliamentarian diplomacy in the framework of the so-called Interparliamentarian Union, a worldwide parliamentarian organization that facilitates exchanges between members of parliament and which gives the opportunity to cooperate and on many subjects, such as empowerment, democracy, state organization? In all these ways that are various, not always simple, but I'm sure that that's what will make for me the challenge very exciting, and that's what is going to make me feel really useful in my work in the parliament in Belgium. Thank you very much for your attention.